So I thought one of the playlists that doesn't get a lot of love on the YouTube channel, on the YouTubes, on the tubes.
The boob tubes.
What are the kids saying these days? Was the Meet the Solomons playlist. And I had a good friend in town, and I thought, oh, I'd love to share Peter with all of you. So it's my good friend Peter Hartwig. We've done all kinds of fun things together. Peter was my roadie for one of the legs of my book tour. Peter was this guy I met in DC. I'm going to let him tell that story here a moment ago. But Peter's just been a great friend, one of my best friends for me. And this guy, well, I'll tell you what my kids said last night. My family got to meet Peter for the first time. Last night he showed up at our house. I've always been somewhere else, and my wife and my kids haven't had a chance to meet Peter yet. Somebody walked in, I'll let them remain nameless, and said, "He's so funny." And the other person in my family said,
"No, he's not."
Said, not only that, he's smarter than Dad. And two of those things could not be more true than both of those things. And I just love having him get the chance to meet my family. But how did we meet? Tell the story of how you...
I do want to say,
okay,
it's clear I think you love your family.
Yes.
Both watching content and knowing you.
Yes.
But like, your kids are awesomer than I was, to be honest, like kind of expecting.
Absolutely.
They are so, if you ever get the chance, you hang with the kids.
Yeah.
They're a blast.
I'm unbelievably spoiled, and I know that. So
yeah,
absolutely, so true. But okay, tell us how we met.
So my recollection of how we met is I was working at a church in DC. One of the pastors of that church, very kindly, our friend Dave Schmidgall.
If he was here, he'd be in the video too. Dave
Yes.
and Kate.
But his head would be up there.
I love that. Absolutely.
So I was living with them, and I had no monies because I was a seminarian. And so I'm hanging out, and one day, Dave's kind of like, "Oh, by the way, someone's going to come stay at the house for a couple of days. His name is Marty." And I was like, "Cool." He's like, "He has a podcast." And I said, "Who doesn't?" And he was like, "No, he's a really good time." And I was like, "Oh, great." So then this big guy walks into the house, and I slowly kind of catch this drift of like, oh, we're talking Bible and theology and history, and Dave, love you, Dave, is kind of an early to bed guy.
You know? Absolutely.
And
I've been told that there's this Princeton seminary grad staying at the upper room in this loft, and if he feels like it, he may wander down. So I don't know what to expect. I'm already super intimidated, and so it's great. Perfect setup to a great evening.
So I think we must have made or ordered dinner, but my memory crystallizes. Dave and Kate have gone to bed. I think it's past midnight. I think it's maybe almost 1 a.m. And we're in the backyard around their fire, kind of old kitchen on the back of the house, fireplace thing. And I remember us just like yelling. Just like, "No way!" and I kind of had this thought. I was like, I think we're going to be friends. And then kind of by God's grace and Dave's wisdom, there was just continually work for you to do and space for you to be in DC. And so those DC days when I was then based there or half based there and you were coming through were just so much fun in that beautiful house with those beautiful people yelling about things.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I love that. So then we got to figure out, like, what do we do on a little YouTube video here to like have this conversation, to share a little slice of my world and my friendships with the world. So you mentioned potentially talking about joy. Mm-hmm. Is that what's occupying your mind? Tell me about joy.
Yeah, so much. I feel like good YouTube content should be like, what would be a value add for other people? I don't know if this is a value add for anybody else, but I've just been thinking a lot about joy. And for me, it was the personal process. I've got a spiritual director. I think we all need spiritual directors. And so I have the spiritual director, and she tried to walk me through a process of the question of like, what do I value and what drives me? And one of the kind of words that came forward that lent a lot of clarity to like why I love what I love and why I try to do what I try to do was joy. Just this, I don't know, like deep, abiding experience of the appreciation of like goodness in the world. And I feel like you must have heard this at some point also. The way people make a distinction between like happiness and joy,
Yeah.
as though like one is shallow and one is deep.
Right.
And I'm a little bit like, why are you trying to take the shallow stuff away?
Right.
Why not? We don't resent the entree for the appetizer, you know?
Yep.
But yeah, I think personally, I have maybe almost been surprised, not to steal the C.S. Lewis line, I've been a little surprised by joy, but specifically, I think I've been surprised by how much I care about, I want, I value, I'm drawn to, like joyful things in the world. And I think it's honestly because, as like a teenager who cared and wanted to be serious about Jesus, I think I tried to tell myself, so like, I don't care about that. Like, I'll go anywhere.
Right.
I'll sacrifice anything. Like, I'm not one of these people who are just like junkies for shallow happiness in the world. Like, I'm about Jesus.
Yeah.
And if that means I don't have any fun anymore, that's okay. I didn't care about fun anyway.
Yep.
And I think I'm just very personally in a space of making a shift of being like, I don't think it's like that. Like, I think it's not all fun all the time following Jesus, obviously, but it is so joyful so much of the time.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I want to hear more people talk about it. I want to hear you talk about that.
Yeah. Well, I still am. I think I'm still trying to pull myself out of my brain still. It's just too easy to go happiness, shallow, joy.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was Rob Bell did a speaking tour once. Everybody called the Heretic Police. Because here I go again. But it was called Introduction to Joy, where he...
Oh, I've never heard of this.
And it's actually, the full thing's on YouTube. If I remember, I'll even put a link in the description of this video. But it's basically this, he's riffing on joy as this deep undergirding bass note. It's this thing that transcends the circumstantial. It is why you can actually, basically he's using his text for the whole talk as Ecclesiastes, of all places. Because he's saying you can't, like when you look at the meaninglessness of life, when you look at the vanity, when you look at the vapor, if it leads you to despair, you've stopped too short. You got to keep going further in, and if it's all gonna end, like if we live, so Lent's coming up. I don't even know when this video is releasing. I think we might be right before the Lenten season actually when this video comes out. And part of what I'm learning about the Lenten season is this conversation about mortality. Mm. And when you come, like we always live like trying to deny mortality. Like we don't want to face mortality. We don't want to face like who wants to talk. And Lent, like the season of Lent, brings us face first with this mortality. And this Ecclesiastes line of wisdom that says, well, if it's all going to, like if it's all vapor, and we don't know if we're going to have 30 years or 30 seconds. We don't know what's going to happen. That's part of the point of Ecclesiastes. If it's all just vapor and we don't even know what's going to come of it or how long it will last, we might as well find joy in the thing that we're here to do. And that was, so I'm still trying to pull apart those categories that I was always handed, like happiness is. I love your comment about, I grew up in a Reformed tradition where there was like this, I will be a martyr, and my neo-martyrdom will be my rejection of all pleasure and joy. And so there is something deeper, and I'm not sure, but it's I don't know if it's just you, I don't know if it's my algorithms, but it's been bouncing around even before you showed up and said that yesterday. It's been bouncing around my algorithms and a discussion on joy. Because I think we're in a place where we're tempted to just throw off all of that, and despair is at the door. And there's something like, okay, there's something else though. And it doesn't undo despair or the real things we're dealing with in any other conversation, but there's something else.
I think one of the reasons I appreciate that you're in dialogue with some Catholic material at the moment, because I feel like
studying at Xavier, getting my grad degree, masters in ethics and masters of theology in ethics and spirituality. For all of you that are like, what? Yeah, I'm really intentionally in that world right now.
They have, and I think this is probably some of the richness you're experiencing. The Catholic tradition has kept alive the belief that we can learn something about the pathway and the life cycle of our spiritual lives that is not reducible to psychology and our emotional life. It's not reducible to just a set of doctrines. It's like, in the same way that like kids grow up and learn to walk and learn to read and growing up as spiritual creatures. And so I don't know all that material. You're the expert here, but my sense is there might be like a discernible stage of the spiritual life where, let's say you come to Jesus, you're like, wow, this stuff is good. I am serious about this. Like, I want to integrate this into my life. And a temptation to take that seriousness and to almost like earn it as a joylessness.
Yep.
To sort of, instead of the pathway that I am like not perfectly, but I'm trying to walk, which is to say, like, not only are there, I don't know, like values or principles, a calling, a vocation, the Sermon on the Mount, stuff I want to take seriously and commit to, but there is also this joy in that for all my seriousness, no matter how like committed and disciplined I am, there's a like humor and a joy and a happiness and in kind of all that stuff. I can't remember who, but the Pentecostal theologian Chris Green recounts a story of a medieval nun who's having visions of Jesus.
Oh, yes.
She goes to her spiritual director.
I've heard this attributed to
You're already farther ahead.
Ragamuffin Gospel. Why am I blanking on the name?
I can't remember it.
Oh my goodness gracious. We're horrible.
I'm not even at the bottom.
Brennan Manning. Manning. I've heard it attributed to Brennan Manning.
Okay. And this nun is like, I'm seeing visions of Jesus, and the spiritual director, she's like, how do I know? And the spiritual director says, make fun of him.
Oh, this is a different story.
Yeah, okay.
I'm all in.
I love
it.
Okay,
okay.
Yeah, so the spiritual director goes like, make fun of him.
Of Jesus.
Yeah, mock him when he shows up. And if he takes it, if he can take the joke, it's Jesus. But if it's a demon or it's the devil, he can't handle his ego being wounded like that.
Okay.
So she makes fun of Jesus, and Jesus kind of gives her the like, it's all right. And the thought, like, what that story captures to me is like, perhaps Jesus, in all of his seriousness, in his real martyrdom, in all of this, it is not void of the joy set before him.
Yeah.
And just to think about all of this stuff as like if you are someone who discovers the Bema. So like, I love Bema. The way I use the podcast you've made is as a gateway drug to this world of other stuff. Of like the so-called new perspective on Paul, or call it Jewish hermeneutics. And wouldn't it be kind of tragic if we found that stuff, we took it really seriously, and then we just serioused it to death.
Yeah, right.
Instead of kind of like reveling in the joy and the mild ridiculousness of how much awesome stuff this stuff does and changes.
I think that fits well. I can remember one of the things that Bell talked about, I think, in that same presentation, was he talked about this pre-conventional joy that's immature. It doesn't want to recognize. It kind of like closes its eyes to. And then there's like this wake up where like, oh my gosh, like things are bad. Like things are even worse than we imagined. And then you get really serious. But then he talked about meeting for the first time the Dalai Lama and whoever it was. There was some friend of the Dalai Lama. Was it Bishop Tutu, I think, actually. And they got together, and the first thing they did when they met was they hugged, and the hug turned into like this little tickle fest. and Rob was like, what in the world is going on? Because these are people that are face to face with some of the hard stuff, but and so then he talked about there's another joy. There's a simple joy that's ignorant, that's immature, but then there's a joy that's gone beyond, and it doesn't deny the darkness. It almost embraces the darkness and says there's something more true and resounding in the midst of that. And I do love, because there's like a life cycle, there's like a maturing that happens. So when you say that about Bema or anything else that we pursue, our eyes get opened up, we wake up, we're growing up, and the temptation is to be like, okay, well now, but that really takes us somewhere else. And I find it interesting that where I feel like I've come back around to in my whole life is kind of where I started in my Reformed tradition, solo gratia, like grace alone, faith alone, like all these principles that had a particular expression, and I've ended up circling around to really a lot of the same truths. Where it's like, well, it's just the gospel.
Right.
Like I love the Jewish hermeneutic stuff, and it gets us all back to the same place, which is really, it was just the love of God, and it always was and always has been, which gives me a whole lot of anyway. But
I love it.
I do like that. Is there anything else we should talk about before people are gone? Added value. What more added value can we get?
Riffing off of,
yes,
like finding the Bema stuff, the moments where I've been kind of swiping people's credit cards while I'm selling the book and you're chatting with folks and I overhear kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I kind of do that a little bit. That's a lot of fun. And folks do this like, I gotta tell you what the podcast changed for me. And I think it'd be interesting to hear you talk about, and I'm also happy to share, but like, what is the sea change? What's the value add? What is the shift that happens when we stumble on to this stuff, call it Jewish hermeneutics or the new perspective or the history, like whatever that thing is that holds together the content that's been crystallized in the podcast. One, to say it explicitly, what is the value add? What's the difference? What's the big deal about that shift? And two, actually, I'd love to hear you try to narrate, if you can. Maybe you totally can, and this is actually not a challenge at all. But hear you try to narrate, this is the center of the many things that come together. Like, so much cool stuff is in the pot. Rabbinic readings, some of this history. Let's think about story. Let's make story really important. Let's think about, there's all of this stuff. And is there one thing that, like, if you pulled that pin out, it would kind of split apart? So one, what's the difference? What's the value? And two, is there one point of coherence?
Yeah, let's just do it backwards. I'll just start with number two in my mind, and who knows, because I'm actually going to kick it back to you here in a moment based on some things we were talking about before we hit record that I thought were really good, and I'm going to be thinking about them for a while. But if you were to ask me that, like the center thing, the pin that you pull out is this ability, we say, to ask questions. And other people, I'm so tired of that phrase at this point because all my books are about asking questions. But it's probably still the right. We live in a world that tried to have all the answers, that tried to create beautiful, clean systems, that tried to. The pin in the middle is being able to look at something and go, really? But what about this? But I'm uncomfortable. And just the ability to question something. People want to use the word deconstruction, which I have no problem with. Some people break out in hives. Whatever that is, it's the ability to look at something and to really, truly engage it, not just blindly accept it, to somewhat embrace doubts, it's that, because then to go back to number one, which is what is this thing we're doing? Why is it so helpful and useful? Well, it just provides some level of objective. It's objective because it's rooted in history. It's objective because it's rooted in scholarship. Mm-hmm. There's an objectivity to this thing that we're doing, looking at things from a lens of history and a Jewish approach and some newer scholarship that people aren't quite as, we're all familiar with this doctrine and that denomination and this systematic theology. This is kind of new. It's a little fresh. The dirty, dark secret is, at the end of the day, it's just a framework that's serving as a useful vehicle right now for so many people to do that work of re-examination, that work of taking something apart and putting something back together, of asking those questions, of confronting those doubts. So there's nothing, I don't know, not all frameworks are created equal. Not all vehicles take you to the place you're supposed to go. But this really, it's freeing. It's a vehicle and a framework that allows people to find some level of freedom in re-examining scripture, that they've been told, here's your answer. It's like, here's the system that, to whatever. But then you were saying something earlier about, because what we're really describing here is there's a companion, there's a guide. Like, we've been used to systems where there's a celebrity, there's a denomination, there's a expression, there's a tradition, and that's where all your like that. Your journey is like to go where they go, do what they do. They have the answers.
Yeah.
This thing has and there's another way to engage this that I think. So you should talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's I don't think the following idea, which is like the shape of how so many stories look. I don't think that idea is hard to find in any particular scholar, or I mean, arguably Aristotle's Poetics is kind of the first time anybody writes out the like, hey, I think I've got the formula for all the stories, and it's been expanded and put together. And I teach at a high school, as you know, and Donald Miller, who wrote Blue Like Jazz, did a TED Talk that is a kind of one, nice overview of this, and two, if you got a business and you're trying to work on your marketing, he can teach you how to use this. But so many stories have your like hero at the center.
Yes.
And you know, if I say hero, I think so many people think the strong one at the top of the. So here's this hero, and they're a hero because they're gonna throw the ring into Mount Doom, or they're gonna kill Voldemort, or they're gonna blow up the Death Star, or whatever. And one of the things that some people talk about in this kind of remarkable way is the irony that the hero, if you think back to the story, the hero is often like the weakest person in the story. So like they have the problem usually. Like they're the one who's being hunted. They're the ones whose world is threatened. Like Jason Bourne doesn't know who he is. You know?
Yeah.
And then these other people come around them, or these fortunate circumstances get them through, or Dumbledore is there to guide Harry, like Gandalf is there to guide the Fellowship. There's the guide. And I've just been thinking some about the, I think, really beautiful and joy-filled shifts that happen when we, stop thinking of ourselves as the hero in our own stories, and therefore as the one who has to be strong or fails.
Yep.
Or two, thinking of other people as people that we need to get in our hero program, as opposed to having the fun of being able to act as a guide in other people's stories.
Yep.
And like, you know, logs and specs here, just because you're the guide in someone else's story doesn't mean you're omniscient or you've got your own stuff figured out, right? But like, the joy of companion.
Samwise Gamgee is not like.
Yeah, right, exactly.
He's not like this, he had the answers the whole time. Right. Like he's kind of like this bumbling, like, but he was the friend that enabled.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And who literally carries the hero.
Yes.
He's the missing hero in this story.
And it is, I mean, I think we all know this, it's amazing how easy it is. I mean, like, I'm still at a big dating stage in life with a lot of friends. It's amazing how much you can look in someone else's relationship and be like, you got some issues. But it's also amazing how much people need to come up to you and be like, hey, guess what? You know, so it's not like, just because you can see things out there doesn't mean you can see them in here. But to think about, you know, something like if I were to try to take all this theology, history, cultural differences in reading, asking questions, a word that came to mind as you were talking about that is like mystery.
Yep.
And all the cool stuff that the Orthodox tradition has done about mystery. Say like, what is our problem? What is our problem? I think so many of us have this problem where, because of how we were raised or something that happened to us, we have this sense that the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ is just, I don't know, like life-consumingly wondrous. Or like we have some sense that like there is a hunger and there is a God who we can feast on somehow. And then we've received that message, but it is attended by all of these probably well-intentioned attempts to help it, but they kind of like, they choke it out some.
Yep.
So, you know, it's like, we want you to wonder and revel in God.
Yep.
So here's a catechism.
Right.
And you're like, well, great. I'm glad this is useful information and maybe it can help me. But isn't there also something to just being like, what?
Yeah.
You know, wondering in the...
Right.
And so, like, the Bema universe, and then all that other wonderful stuff you guys reference. Just there's a richness of guides out there to help us where we, in our weaknesses, are trying to sort of do our part, whatever that's like, in like openness to the God whose voice or a glimpse of whom we manage to see, despite the benefits and the shortcomings of our Reformed backgrounds or our Pentecostal backgrounds or our fill in your blank background. And yeah, I think the value add here is like, it is at this point in time in the life of God's church, there's just all this great stuff that can help us turn a corner.
Well, I loved how you framed it that way, because that has been like, that was like, yes, that's what I've always tried to tell people. All I'm doing is wanting to share with you in the same way that something was shared with me.
Right.
Like, I'm not the authority, goodness gracious, I'm not a scholar, but if I can take, like, I have received from all these guides. I've had a whole bunch of Samwise Ganges, or maybe Gandalf. Ray Vanderland's probably my Gandalf to whatever. And if I can be that, and what that does, what I love about you, is if I becomes, it continues to perpetuate the same cycle. It's not the hero. It's the, well, now I get to become the guide to somebody else.
Right.
And that's a lot of what Bema, that's really what we're trying to do. And you've helped reframe some of that in some beautiful ways. So I think that's good.
Here's a question I think we should end on.
Okay.
That I don't have an answer to, but I've been thinking about. And let's just, for the sake of conversation, say the hero guide thing is real and reflected. Is Jesus a hero or a guide in any really unique way? Like, if we try to think of Jesus in the hero, what happens to that? I don't know.
I don't know either. I mean, it fits so many of those arcs that we're used to in the hero sense, but maybe that's what the New Testament keeps trying to beg out, as he's not the hero that we think we understand. He is the hero that every story ultimately needed, which was the hero that was willing to, it's that Philippians 2 thing, empty himself and become, he was the hero who was the guide. Even though if there was ever a story where the hero was going to be the hero, it would have been Jesus, and yet he became the guide of all guides.
And does he guide us in a way that's different than other guides guide people? Do you, like, is there some, if you hold up Gandalf and Dumbledore, keep doing these, but all these guides, if you hold Jesus up as guide with them, how does he flip that script? Also, like, I don't have concretized thoughts, but I have this sense that learning that, and learning it ironically from him, by his spirit in his scripture, all that stuff is just, that's got to be a thrill.
All right, so many things to keep this conversation going and think about, because I just had about 5 things that I don't have answers for in the last 30 seconds. So wonderful things to think about. Friends, meet my friend.
Hi, friends.
Peter, meet my friends. I don't know who my friends are. A lot of them, based on the YouTube comments, aren't my friend. But it's been good to get together, add another video to the Meet the Solomons playlist, and we'll see what happens next. We'll see you on the next video in the next week or so.